All right. Carl Grant III, thank you for being here today. Looking at
My
your
pleasure.
bio and things, you're a writer, speaker, business owner, former military from a speech I've seen that you've done on the internet. What have you written lately?
So I wrote my first book called How to Live the Abundant Life. And, I've never written a book before. It's my first time doing it. So it's quite the adventure. I didn't know what I was doing when I first started out. So I hired a publishing company to help me drive it to completion. And so it was a several year process.
How did you figure out the topic you were going to write about?
I thought I was going to write a book on business. So before starting my own business, I had done professional services business development for two of the most prestigious firms in the world, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Cooley. And Cooley's a law firm. And nobody ever taught me how to do that, nor have I found anybody that teaches that how to do that in a formal way. And so I thought I was going to write a book telling folks how to do that because I've spoken back at my university. I went to undergrad, and I realized the kids there really had an interest in what I did and wanted to learn more about it. But as I got into putting it together, I realized that's really a niche topic, and I have so much more to offer folks. And the things that made me successful in selling accounting and legal services, that is really you have to get people to like you and want to work with you and trust you. Those things work at home and they work in the community as well. So I broadened it to be a self-help book, and I applied those things that made me successful in my work life because they also made me successful at home and in the community.
When you were writing it, did you have like a daily goal of like a topic, a word count, or something like that you were trying to go with? How'd you stay motivated while you were writing it?
Well, when I started out, I started writing essays, TR, because writing a book just seemed so daunting to me. I mean, it just seemed so much beyond anything I'd ever done. But I'd written lots of essays, college essays. I've got 5 kids. I helped them with their essays. I mean, essays were doable. So I wrote a bunch of essays, and they were sitting on my computer for years and years. So I published those essays on LinkedIn just so that they would find some readers. And so that was really the first attempt at writing. And then when I decided to go ahead and pull the trigger and do a book, and I engaged this company called Leaders Press, which did a great job. They have, since they've done it so many times, they have a way of doing it. We set a schedule where it was a weekly schedule, so it was a chapter a week, and they would send me questions about each of my outline topics, and then I would answer those questions. I would type them up, and then they would interview me, and they would get even more information out of me in those interviews. And then I had a writer who helped me pull all of my material together into a chapter, and then I ultimately would edit that chapter. So that was the process, and it seemed to work really well.
Yeah, that sounds. I find whatever your process is, as long as you have it spelled out somehow, then it keeps you going. So that sounds good. A chapter a week that's doing something.
It was. I mean, there were weeks that I was, traveling or busy. So those weeks, spread out to a couple years, how that goes. And then what, after doing what I thought was a finished product, TR, my oldest daughter got a hold of it, and she said, "Dad, let me read this. I buy a lot of these kind of books, and I want to see what you're putting out there." And she came back to me and she said, "You need to kill your baby, Dad." that was really hard information to get. She said about a third of this book needs to go because it's too businessy. And if you want people like me, introverts, if you want students and stay-at-home moms and retired people to read this book, you got to get rid of a lot of this business networking stuff. And so I did, and it was hard because she had to make the call to cut big portions of it out, and then encourage me to rewrite different topics. And so it changed a lot over that year.
It's good to have a ideal reader, I think, to be able to run it by to see if it's tracking the way that
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
intend it to, like for the audience you want. How much of your previous essays did you use transferring over into it? or was it
There's a
any?
little if any, really. In fact, kind of embarrassed of those essays now because they were written so long ago. I want to take them down, but I can't figure it out. The book is so much better than those essays were because I had lots of other eyeballs on it, before it went out, and I
Yeah.
had input and feedback, and it really went through a lot of scrutiny before putting it out into written form.
Hmm. Well, nobody uses LinkedIn anyway, so you're okay. So when
Only about
she,
17,000 connections I have on there, TR. So.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I linked out about 10 years ago when I was like, man, I've had this for a long time and I've got a lot of personal information up there. And I think that was, I was in policing and then I was always um, protective of information of people I knew and then my own. And I was like, man, this is a lot of stuff putting out here, a lot of connections that maybe I don't want it to be so easy for people to figure out. If I
I
was
don't
in a
blame you.
different business, I would think
I don't blame
it'd
you.
be different. But
I watch a lot of these crime shows, and if I was a policeman, I'd be pretty low key and private myself.
yeah, I'm glad that I didn't have all the social media things when I was policing because I don't think I would have used it, but there was no temptation to use it. You don't have a thing where you're putting where you are or what you're doing for anybody to see. So it's kind of
Well, hopefully you didn't put anybody away who's thinking about you for 20 years coming back.
yeah, I hope not. Maybe I'll just drift into the background.
Yeah.
But when your daughter's reading it, how much did you take out a big amount of the book or did you like change it into stories or different things to make it more palatable for the non-business?
It was a combination. I mean, it was about 1/3 different when it was done. So it was a combination of just cutting stuff out and adding new stuff in. And at this point, the interviewers and the writer and all that, they were all out the window. I said, look, this is my book. Just we got to drive this thing home. And so it was really the two of us, and she was really helpful because I was writing it to a specific audience, and that was
Mhm.
late 20s, self-help person, enthusiast who she's wired different than me. I'm an extrovert. I'm out there. I enjoy people. She would just as soon stay inside and work on her business and not have to deal with anyone. And so, those are the type of people that read books, more than me.
Yeah.
I'll listen to audiobooks, but I've got to be really, really interested in something to sit down and pour through a written text.
Have you made your book an audiobook?
I have, yeah. I'm waiting for it to come out. I
Okay.
checked this morning to see if it had come out yet. I actually read the whole thing, which, boy, that was
Okay.
daunting. I mean, it's a lot of days in the closet. Closet's my sound room. Reading and
Yeah.
then rereading and then after I reread it, and sent it to the folks that put it together, they sent me back stuff that I had to reread again because even though I thought it was good, I still managed to stumble over words and wasn't quite where it needed to be.
Yeah. Wow. What did you go through the same place that you did the publishing for the audiobook?
They have it's a one-stop shop where they've got folks. I don't think they're in-house, but I think they sub it out to somebody, and so yeah, they organized all of that.
All right. When
So
you're
if
writing,
you get my audiobook, I think I'm not a professional reader. I've done podcasts like you. I've done radio and stuff. Was a broadcast journalism undergrad, but I'm not a professional reader. So I think I would rather hear an authentic voice, somebody who actually wrote the book reading it than some professional voice. So forgive me if I'm not the best reader, but at least it's me.
yeah, you hear a lot of people that say it's better when the author reads it. And unless you could get somebody like Sean Connery or James Earl Jones to read it, then that would make it more interesting, I think. But yeah, it's
Not in
good.
the budget.
Yeah. When you were writing, what kind of place did you do most of your writing? Did you have a place that was set up for it, or was it anywhere you could write?
I did a lot of it right here. I'm sitting on my back porch overlooking Lake Travis outside of Austin. Spent a lot of time here, and then I also have a treadmill desk. I like to walk when I work, and so it keeps the brain juices flowing. And so, but you can only walk so much at a time. I gotta sit down every now and then. So it was between that treadmill desk and right here.
Do you notice a difference between your writing if you're walking versus sitting?
I do, because when I'm sitting, I start to nod off. You just it's monotonous and tiring, and I also, living on a lake, you can see the boats going out, and you don't know how many weekends I sat here wishing I was out on one of those boats, but I knew I wanted to finish this book, so I sacrificed to get it done. Yeah, so I didn't really have the same sensation, even though I could see the same lake from my treadmill desk. It wasn't the same as hearing the people going out, where you could hear the rush of the water, and kind of
Yeah.
some of the party barges going out, and I'm feeling a little bit left out.
Do you have times when you're writing where you feel like it's kind of you're writing on your topic and feels like it's kind of writing itself, or was it more of answering this question, plugging this in, making it a paragraph, thinking about a story that talks about it as an example?
TR, I think some of it was inspired, right? Anybody who does anything that they're passionate about, whether you're writing music or writing a book or speaking, I don't know quite how it happens, but you get this download where it just flows, and I had some of that, and so I would say that the day that I got that the strongest, where I felt like I got a download, was the day I came up with the title and the outline, because I was sick with what I thought was the Omicron variant of COVID. At least that's what it felt like, when people described it. And I was wiped out for 3 weeks. I had a hard time even typing an email. I mean, that's how wiped out I was. And so I remember waking up the morning I was supposed to have the kickoff meeting, and I said a prayer. I said, Lord, please, you know, give me the strength and the mental clarity to be able to have this meeting and to do what I need to do here. And it was that morning when I got up and I just had this clarity of mind, and it just came to me. The topic, the title and the topics just came to me. We tweaked them a little bit, but it's still, for the most part, the outline that I got that morning. And so I had a few days like that where I just felt like it flowed, and I knew that I had something in me that I wanted to impart to whoever was meant to read this book.
Oh, nice. Is there things that you do to prepare for writing? Are there things like to get in that state of mind and maybe hopefully to get to the point where you have that more inspired writing than just sitting there and grinding it out?
I'd say I have a cup of coffee and I say a prayer.
Hmm.
It's real simple, It's not very complex, and that seems to work. And then I have other things that I have things that I drink throughout the day that kind of keep the brain going. And yeah, coca tea,
Hmm.
that's one of them.
What? Oh, coca tea. I was recently in Peru, and they
That's,
is that where you get yours?
yeah, yeah. I went to Peru with my youngest daughter and hiked Machu Picchu, and came away with some coca tea.
We did that recently. What? How long ago were you there?
It, it's been a few years now. I can't remember the exact time. It was pre-COVID, but
Hmm.
that was a great time. I mean, she wanted to hike it. I when I first planned the trip, I planned the train in and out, and she goes, "No, Dad, I don't want to take the train. I want to hike there." And so we did. You do the hike, Dr?
No, took the train. Took the train.
Well, you didn't have a gung ho young daughter who wanted to hike, so we spent 4 days and 3 nights going over the what are the mountains there? The Andes. The Andes, is
Hmm.
that what it's called? Andes Mountains. I
Hmm.
remember going over Dead Woman's Pass. I mean, it was 3 days without a cell phone. I remember distinctly. It was It was when President Trump was still president, and when North Korea was acting up before those guys made friends. And
Huh.
because I remember being 3 days, and 3 nights on that trail, nobody knew what happened in the world. We didn't have any idea what happened in the world. There could have been a nuclear war, and we didn't
Yeah.
know. And so there was, after we got past Dead Woman's Pass, which is this real tall pass up there, we got a phone signal on the other side of the mountain. And I had all the people from our group shouting questions for, my son, I think he was 15 years old at the time. They're saying, did we get in a nuclear war? Like, my kid's going to know, and is President Trump still president? And they had all these crazy questions, and I'm asking him, he goes, yeah, I think so. So that was a funny experience, because I mean, I had no idea what was going on in the world up there. It was kind of freeing, actually.
Yeah, that wouldn't be bad, being without the phone for a few days. The when on the train, while we were having the meals served, you could see where the people would walk at some points. So it's there in spirit. But it's yeah, that's an interesting trip. It's Machu Picchu was interesting. I don't know if I think it's a once in a lifetime trip, because you go one time and you're like, okay, I got it. I'm not sure I'd go back again, but I think it was good to go to see.
Well, the hike was a whole other experience. The
I imagine.
the getting to actually Machu Picchu, that wasn't the highlight of the trip. It was the journey, and it was making it up and over all those mountains, and meeting the people that you met back there along the way. And at one point, you're walking through a rainforest, and I remember my daughter had befriended a woman. It was funny. We called her the 58-year-old teenager, because this woman had one of these boom boxes, a little mini boom box on her hip, and they would take turns sending their playlists to this little boom box. And so they kind of disturbed the peace out there in the rainforest, because they were dancing through the trip, and it was a good time. And everybody had funny nicknames that they gave each other out there, and
Yeah.
that was the fun of the trip. Was really the hike.
I learned on that trip that altitude is a real thing. Like in Peru, where we flew into, man, I can't remember the name of the city now, but it's
Cusco.
11,000 some feet.
Oh no.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Cusco is. Did you fly in there? Yeah. So
Yeah,
we
Cusco's.
acclimated there for several days.
Ugh. I worked out in one of the hotels in Cusco, and I was like, okay, this will be better because I can develop some more red blood cells maybe. And I felt good when I was working out, doing the running and all the other stuff. And then after that, I was like, oh, this might have been a mistake to do that this soon. But we had been there for a few days, going back and forth between maybe 6,000 feet, 11,000 feet at different places. And I think Machu Picchu is actually not that high. I think it's below 6,000 feet once you get to Machu Picchu itself. And certainly when you're in Aguas Calientes, you're below 5,000 or 4,000 feet. But yeah, I hadn't been somewhere where I remember the altitude messing with me like that. So
Yeah, Cusco was a really nice place. Those people are kind of kept away from the worries of the world, and it was really interesting to hang out there. I think we were there for 4 days, because they're very religious people, but they have their traditions date back to kind of their ancient religions, right? They used to worship the sun and the moon and all of that. And so you would see the images in the churches where they would have like the Virgin Mary, but they would have the moon and the sun and some of their old traditions in there. And it was really fascinating to see all that, and in the ornate clothes that they wore. There was some sort of festival going on when we were there. And it just, having gone to Lima and then Miraflores, where it's kind of a worldly city, and then going up to Cusco, where the people are really separated from the world. I don't know that they even watch television up there. It was really a peaceful place to be, and the people were so nice.
Yeah, they're building a airport about an hour away from Machu Picchu, and I think that's outside of Cusco. So you're going to get, it's an international airport. I'd probably be finished in a few years, but I think that'll do a lot for that area that they're putting it in, which is mainly agricultural, but it gets you out of Lima and Cusco, and you won't have to fly into any of those. I mean, maybe things were different back then. It was okay, but the more I travel, the more I go. I reassure myself America is the place I want to live. But yeah, hmm. Machu Picchu. All right. After you, did you go into there? You did the walk in and then you walked out, or did you take the train
No,
out?
no, we took the train back. The train back was nice, because we could sit and rest our legs, and we had the white tablecloths, and it was a nice trip back.
Yeah. That little town that the train goes into, I can't remember the name of it, but it has that also some more of that structure of Machu Picchu. It doesn't look exactly the same, but it's kind of the same where you're looking at those walls that have the stones that are those the way they're fit together is so tight that you're like, wow, that's aliens definitely did that. The tour guides didn't like it when I pointed out that aliens made that. So we'll see.
I don't know. I think some of that stuff was there pre-flood. I've looked at those types of structures all over the world, and you look at them, and there's not a lot of human explanations for these things. So I'm kind of fascinated with those ancient societies.
Yeah. Even Machu Picchu themselves, they say there's more to it than what you see when you're there, like the classic pictures of it. And when you're standing there, it's a complex, but then you can see across on the mountains around it the what looks like trails that are overgrown. And they say that it was a small percentage of what was uncovered, that there's more there. But since it's that UNESCO site now, I don't think they'll uncover much more of it. And then they've limited how many people can go there per year now. So
I'm sure there's rich history up there. That was the capital of that whole area back then, and
yeah.
it's hard to believe that it was run from that area up on top of those mountains, but it was. And so I'm sure. Go ahead.
Did you take the bus after you were at Machu Picchu? Did you take the buses down to Aguas Calientes to get the train, or did you hike down?
No, we took a bus.
Yeah, that's a
We,
terrifying bus ride if you're looking out of the window.
nothing more terrifying than some of those mountains we climbed up. So not everybody made it on that trip.
Oh, okay.
They had to take some of them out. So I was happy to make that trip. I've done some
Wow.
interesting hikes. I did Grand Canyon. I've done that twice, and I remember when I did the Grand Canyon the second time. I did it with both of my boys when they were very young. I had an old skiing injury in my knee, and it was acting up really bad right before I was supposed to go on that hike. And I didn't want to be the dad that was medevaced out of the Grand Canyon. So I went and had knee surgery and rescheduled the trip and made it. So
How'd the Grand Canyon hike compare to the Machu Picchu trail in?
it's really different. I mean, when you're doing Machu Picchu, you're going up, you're climbing the Andes Mountains. When you're doing the Grand Canyon, at least the first day, you're going down. It's all the way down. After you've, and then when you're coming down the Andes, it's easier, right? And so it's the opposite with the Grand Canyon, because you go down, it's pretty easy, and then the next day after you've gotten to Phantom Ranch, is where we stayed both times, you had to hike back up that thing, and that's a bear.
Yeah, they need an elevator. I kind of think for Machu Picchu, they need like cable cars or something to go up and down that instead of the buses. I don't want to put the bus drivers out of work, but that just seems like catastrophe waiting to happen.
Well, what blew me away the most on that trip were these Sherpas, if that's the right word, from the guys that carry stuff.
Yeah.
And we had guys. There were guys that were pushing 60 years old that were carrying stacks of everybody's packs and everything. And these guys, some of them didn't have a gray hair on their head, and they managed to stay very youthful and very strong. And I was asking how they did it, and they back to the coca tea. They said that they swore it was the coca leaves that they chewed on those things all day. I don't know if that's true or not. It's enough to make me want to drink some coca tea, just in the hope that it would keep me young.
Yeah, I drank some of that tea and I was like, all right, I should feel better now after I drink this. And I didn't notice any difference. But yeah, those guys that are out there every day going up and down there, it's definitely a different class of athlete. I was called Colorado more than once at the airports, which is what they call people that it's not Colorado, it's Colorado because of the blood in your cheeks, like the red cheeks because of the altitude. So I was like, oh, okay, that's good. I learned enough Spanish to be able to hear that.
Interesting.
Did you learn Spanish before you went, or take any Spanish classes?
No, I mean, my daughter had learned Spanish. We didn't have to use any of it. We had this tour guide. His name was George, but we called him Jorge of the Jungle, and he spoke perfect English. And so we really didn't have to use any Spanish. The only time where I really felt like I needed it was when I was taking an Uber, in and around Miraflores, because they didn't speak a lick of English. And my daughter, who used to speak fluent Spanish, somehow she's forgotten it. We were trying to get them to take us to a beach. I remember getting out the Google Translate and trying to explain to them we wanted to go to a nice beach. We just couldn't. Yeah. We couldn't say it, like one where people would go to, and he thought we were crazy because it was the fall over there, but it was still pretty nice down there. And we just wanted to go to a beach where people went to the beach, but he didn't understand what we were looking for. Eventually he did drop us off at an acceptable place, but it was a bear trying to communicate with them.
Wow. Yeah. We were trying to learn about 6 months before we went on like a language learning app. And you get 6 months in and you're like, wow, I know a lot of words. I still don't know a lot of words, but I should know enough to be able to make my way through there. And then you try to go to like a Spanish speaking restaurant just locally. And then you realize, wait a minute, I might not know as much Spanish as I think I know. And then you get over there and you're like, okay, you can pick out words, but maybe if I had 5 minutes, a person would say a sentence to me and then I could think about it for a few minutes. I could go, okay, now I know what they're saying. But it's something different to get conversational in it. I'd have to, I think probably the total immersion is the way to go, where you just don't speak anything else.
Yeah, I found that when you stayed along the kind of the beaten paths where the tourists came a lot, the folks around there knew enough English to get by, right? Because they're used to talking to people all over the world, and English has really kind of emerged as the international language. It's only when you get off the beaten path and you take an Uber somewhere where tourists don't normally go that you're in trouble, and that's when I felt like I needed some Spanish.
Well, then, did any of your travel make it into your book somehow through examples or ideas?
I did. I've traveled a lot, and I know I referenced some of it in the book. I can't remember the specific stories, but I know that it did because it was such a big part of my life. I've traveled most places in the world. I can think of the places I haven't gone more than I can think of all the places that I have gone. So I've been spending a lot of time in the Middle East, and that was after the book was completed. But that's been a really interesting chapter of my life. I've been to Pakistan 2 times and Saudi Arabia 2 times recently, and so it opened up a whole new world to me. Interesting that they're reading my book over there. I didn't know that was going to be a use of my book when I wrote it. I had a gentleman who works for the Saudi government who knew my name and was reading my book. That surprised me.
I wonder if they're doing that because they just found it and then that's how they found you, or if it's kind of a background. They know you're coming over, so then they look into you and see you have a book, so see what your book's about.
I think it could have been that. I think it could have been that. I was so flabbergasted that somebody that far away was actually reading it, and he finished it, and he actually wrote the first Saudi Arabia Amazon review.
Nice.
And what was interesting about that was it opened up a door to a friendship. I actually got invited to a barbecue with him and his coworkers and their kids, and that was a really nice experience. I mean, there's nothing like getting invited to private stuff like that when you're overseas, where you're not in some sort of tourist trap, planned tour where you're just hanging with normal folks, and that was really nice.
Wow. There, I don't know if they've started building that city over there I can't remember the name of the state or province that it's in, that the line where it's just
Yeah.
the 100 and whatever kilometer city.
I heard about it. I wasn't near there. I was in Riyadh when I was there both times. So, but I know
Was
it's
that,
underway.
yeah. Was that for work that you're traveling over there, or what takes you
Kind
to
of
the
for
Middle East?
work. Kind of. I mean, it's not directly. So I, it's kind of a complicated thing to explain, TR. So I know you mentioned you wanted to talk a little bit about faith in here. So at the age of 24, I went from being an atheist to not being an atheist anymore. I actually became a Christian, kind of midway through, and I didn't stop at just becoming a Christian and reading the Bible. I actually read the Quran too, and not too many people have done that, either in the Middle East or in America. And there's a few of us, but that really kind of opened my eyes to kind of the belief system of that part of the world. And so, since I understand them, and I have many friends from that region, I feel like I'm in a unique position to build bridges between those two different cultures and two different faiths, and we're actually working on setting up a venture fund over in Saudi Arabia. I have a partner in Saudi Arabia, and I've got another one in Islamabad, where I've also been. And they're really trying to stimulate business over there. They're really trying to diversify the country, beyond just being an oil country to a country that's known for other things, and part of that is technology. And so they have really amazing incentives over there, and they're super business friendly over there. I couldn't believe, the friendliness and the warmth that they express towards us, and the understanding of our business culture, and the perfect speaking of English that I encountered when I was there. It was really, really refreshing.
Why do you think that places like that are interested in American business so much?
Well, for Saudi Arabia, they have the crown prince over there, who's going to be the future king, MBS. He goes by Mohammed bin Salman. He's 38-year-old guy who's got a vision of really transforming that country to become part of the international business community. And prior to him, it wasn't so much. I mean, they really were their own thing, and so there's been a lot of changes over there, and they really want to be part of the international business community, and not just an oil exporter. And so I think it's a top-down approach. It's interesting. It's kind of the opposite over there than it is here. I mean, I've noticed, going to school as a college student, the seems like the culture in the U.S. always kind of, we kind of have a rebellious nature to us, right? the people, kind of go the opposite way of the leadership here. Whereas over there, this guy has given a vision for the country, and the whole country has bought into it. At least everybody I've interacted with, from government officials to business people to just average folks, they're all, in line to see this Vision 2030 plan that he set forth. And so they're all playing a role in doing that. And for some of them, that means studying abroad and learning other cultures and bringing it back to Saudi Arabia. Some of the dress is starting to change over there. Not that they still have their traditions, but they're more accustomed to other ways of doing things other than just their way.
Yeah. I mean, if I lived over there, I would dress like they dress just because of the heat from my experience of the Middle East. But How much did
I
you?
haven't been there when it was that hot. I know they all talk about it, but I've been
Oof.
there when it was cooler, and it's still it's nice. I mean, it's kind of I live in Texas. It's kind of like Texas on steroids there. You know, we complain because it's over 100 degrees for 3 months here. For them, it's Fahrenheit. It's more like 136 degrees. So it's just a
Yeah.
little bit warmer. Yeah.
Yeah, it's when we were in 29 Palms before I got deployed during the Iraq thing in 2003, and they were saying, the heat here is just as hot as it is over there in the Middle East, and it was in the 120s in 29 Palms when we were there, and I was like, man, this is not comfortable, but you get used to it, and then when we got deployed over there, it's is a different kind of heat that you can't explain to people that haven't been in it. Like, think about taking all your stuff, put all your clothes on and then go sit in a dry sauna. Yeah, you went in dry, but you're not going to be dry if you're moving at all. And then, after you sweat out all your water, you might dry. But it's like that, except you can't escape it. And it is the 130s, the 140s sometimes, depending on where you are. And like if you're around where like an airport, like a blacktop or something, it's going to be in the 140s easy. And I think the hottest surface temperature that I saw was in Iran somewhere. Not that I was in Iran, but just looking up hottest surface temperature on Earth was in the 140s, maybe 146, something like that, in the Lut Desert that's in Iran. And you can definitely get over that when you're on asphalt or concrete somewhere where the sun is just beating down on there and heating it up all the time. But yeah, it's a different it changed my biblical view of the world from going to Sunday school and thinking about shepherds watching their sheep in the field at night and thinking of some pastoral scene of green grass, rolling hills, and you're just out there with your, the weather's okay, you're seeing the stars, you got your shepherd's crook, and you're just keeping track of your sheep. And then you get over there and you see the shepherds, and you're like, oh, that's 3 or 4 goats in a place that has barely any greenery, and it's not sand like a sand desert, like you're at the beach. It's sand like dirt. Like, to me, it reminded me of landfills growing up, where we lived down the country, and the dump was just a hole in the ground where you threw your stuff and they covered it up. It wasn't a sanitary landfill or anything like they have now. But that's then you could understand a little more. And you're living in a tent. It's 130 during the day, and you're living in a tent. And you have to get your water delivered. Then I was like, okay, I understand the suicide bomber a little better, because you tell somebody that's impressionable that you're going to have all these great things if you kill yourself, or you can come back home to your tent. I was like, oh, okay, I get it a little more. I don't know if I'd want to be a suicide bomber still, but I understand it a little more.
Yeah. No, I unfortunately I wasn't over there in those conditions, but that sounds
Mm.
rough. I was an air
I
conditioner.
did read I did read the Quran in 2003 going over there, and it is interesting to think what you would think of it if you hadn't grown up in a different religion. So I'm a kid that went to Sunday school since I can remember. So I have the biblical view that's ingrained in there. Like, I would imagine someone that read the Quran since they were a little kid or went to Sunday schools or whatever type of equivalent they have in those places. It would take somebody that didn't have either one of those kind of indoctrinated in when they were younger to be able to bridge that. So that's interesting to be able to see both of those. What was your impression of the Quran versus the Bible?
Well, what surprised me the most about the Quran was how much we believe in common. That's what surprised me the most. I didn't when I opened it up, I didn't know that Jesus was mentioned in the Quran. I didn't know any of that. I didn't know what I was getting into. But as I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh, they consider Jesus the Messiah, born of the Virgin Mary, right? I mean, it is, the deliverer of the good news, that they believe that he performed miracles. They believe he's coming back to rule and reign. That's a lot of what we believe. If you're going to the same type of Sunday school I'm familiar with, and yet they have a different view of who he is vis-a-vis their relationship with God, or as they would call him, Allah. And so, once you kind of get to what you agree on, it's and you're not trying to convert them, because that's not something that's seen kindly in that society. So I don't even go there. I just have a conversation with them about who Jesus is, and they'll talk to you about Jesus all day long, because he's the most prominent character in the Quran. And so I've had some very interesting discussions with people. Not, they're not combative or anything. There's just like, what is your understanding? And here's our understanding. And then you realize that some of the words that they use don't translate. Like son of God does not translate into Arabic. It's the word in Arabic, Ibn Allah, means son born of sexual intercourse, which is blasphemous to them. And so you have to use different terms, like blessed one of God. And you just learn how to talk with them in a way that doesn't, conjure up, images or views that aren't consistent with their culture and their thinking.
Yeah. I found the Quran to be a more warrior based book than the Bible. But I think I'm looking at that as a person that grew up with the Bible, because if you go back and read the Bible, there's a lot of warrior based things in there too, talking about destroying your enemy, insulting the earth. I mean, that's not very friendly, but yeah, I think there's some differences. I mean, the death for apostasy, that's a sticking point for me, but yeah, I think there's a lot of common ground that when you just get to the edges of it, like the fundamental edges of both religions, that's where you're going to get the problems. But you can probably agree enough in the middle to get things done.
What I found
what do you think?
In any faith tradition, you've got your extremists, right? I don't know what they are. Say 20% that are just fringe, right? We've got them. Judaism has them. Everybody's got them, right? Islam has them as well, and most Muslims don't want anything to do with the extremist elements in the societies, right? And then you've got the middle, right? You've got, I don't know what it is. Just say it's maybe 60% of the population. It's kind of like us, cultural Christians. I wouldn't consider myself a cultural Christian, but people who consider themselves Christians, but they don't read the Bible, they don't go to church. They might put up a Christmas tree and do an Easter egg hunt. I mean, they just get along. I would say the vast majority of those societies is like that. And then you've got the 20% that are more enlightened, and so I've had, I mean, I can't tell you how many happy Easter messages I got from my friends over in that part of the world, where I've had some of them say, you know what, I believe you have to first be a good Christian before you became a good Muslim. That's the other extreme of the thinking that I've encountered over there. So there's definitely a wide spectrum, and I tend to the groups I run with tend to be the more educated parts of society, people who have studied abroad, who are open to other ideas. A lot of them have watched a lot of the same television that I've watched. That some of them have watched The Chosen. If you've watched The Chosen, so they're not just listening to what somebody told them as a kid, or they're much easier to talk to than most. So I had one guy who, what did he say? He said, when the topic of faith came up, he goes, same religion, different versions, which was interesting, right? And so that's how a lot of them think over there.
Yeah, I think there's common ground. It's interesting though when you get that bell curve of believers, maybe that you get the fundamental ones or the radical ones, and they know the right things to say to kind of get the more moderate people a little more on their side or aggravated or whatever. So religion is a strange thing.
Politicization of religion that I don't like. I don't like that. I think naturally people want to be at peace with one another, but there's always the agitators. In fact, I tell you a story of being in the old city of Jerusalem, where they have quadrants. There've been quadrants there for thousands of years. They've got the Muslim quadrant, they've got the Jewish quadrant, and they've got the Christian quadrant. I think the fourth one is the Armenian quadrant or something like that. And the interesting thing is, I walked from quadrant to quadrant, and I asked them about their neighbors. They would say, like the Muslims would say, "Oh, the Christians are our brothers. They watch our stores for us on our Sabbath," because they all have different Sabbaths. The Muslims have Friday, the Jews have Saturday, and the Christians have Sunday. And so they watch each other's shops on their Sabbath so they can stay open 7 days a week, which I thought was beautiful. I think that's the natural order of things. But there's the agitators that try to create the conflict and work people up to be against one another. I'm a peacemaker.
Yeah. What do you think religion is?
I don't like to even use the term religion, to be honest with you, because I was a person who grew up without anything. As far as I knew, I was the center of the universe, and everything was here to serve me. And that's kind of an ugly place to be, right? I didn't grow up like you. And then when I finally came to faith, I like to call it a faith, I realized that I wasn't the center of the universe, and that my thinking was completely wrong. And so it's an amazing point to get to where you just totally change your mind on everything. And so for me, it's about faith. I had never been part of a church. I had never read the Bible, but I came to faith. It was a simple faith.
I like that. That's a good way to put it. I see religion sometimes, the more modern version of it, maybe even the past version, is like it's a thick politic. So it's just, no doubt there are, in every religion, in every social structure, there are things set there to control people, because you want them to act a certain way. You want people to do what they ought to do, defined by whatever it is, whatever authority you think is the one that's putting those out. So I think the nice way to look at religion is it's trying to teach self-control, but then you have the idea of what is, if it's control and it's a more political type control, like you want people to do these certain things this certain way because you want to maintain power over them, then I think that's where it gets into the political side more. So
I agree with you. And that's the part of, you talked about, you're convinced America's the place you want to live. I mean, that's the one beautiful thing about this land, is that we're free. And I talk about that when I'm overseas. In America, you got the freedom to change your mind. I went from being this to that. And if I change my mind again, I could. I've got the freedom to do that. And so I don't believe anybody ought to be killing somebody else because of different beliefs, or throwing people off of roofs because they don't live the way they think they ought to live. I as much as certain elements of our society, kind of disgust me, I still celebrate their freedom to be able to do what they want. And so that's the beautiful thing about America, is that we're still the land of the free.
Yeah.
And like you, I was a military veteran too. I didn't serve in a combat zone. My son did. But
well, you were in Panama, right?
Yeah, I did go to Panama twice. And I was there after we had invaded. So I was part of the first unit to stay off of the military post invasion back in, I don't know, it was late 80s, early 90s time frame, long time ago.
What was the service like you thought it would be?
I enjoyed my time in the military. I don't know that I would as much today, but I did back when I served. I served when Ronald Reagan was president. It was a very patriotic time in our country, and I felt very good about doing it. And I don't want to get too much into conspiracies and things. I'm not too pleased with some of the things that we get ourselves into these days. But back then I joined to defend our country, and and I enjoyed it a lot. I was infantry, I was airborne, and then most of the time I served, even though I was an infantry officer, I found myself into public affairs because when I needed a unit when I was in graduate school, I there was a public affairs detachment there that could use the skills I had developed when I was studying journalism, and so that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed going into like Panama and Honduras and looking at what we were doing, the type of training that we were doing, type of bridge building that we're doing, and telling that story both internally within the that they called it CONUS, continental U.S., and back home too, so that there would be support for what the soldiers were doing over there. And we were doing some pretty cool things. I was supporting an engineering battalion over there that built a school in Honduras, and that was pretty cool. I mean, they made those kids really happy. I say the most embarrassing thing that happened to me over there was when the school kids sang their national anthem for us, and there were just, I don't know, there were 2 or 3 of us who were there as part of that, and then it was our turn to sing our national anthem. And I don't know that you could do that solo. It was pretty rough. We got through it, but one of us would say, "Oh, say can you?" and somebody else would pick it up, and eventually we got through it. But it's not something we sing every day, and yeah, that was not something that I knew was going to be part of my duty when I signed up.
Yeah, I think we get farther in the world if we did more of that. If we did more of the supporting communities, building church, not churches, but building, I mean, you could build a church, but schools and things like that. I think that's probably a better way of trying to influence the world than going in and forcing people or thinking that you're going to use your power to make them do what you want them to do. But I'm not sure what the best way to deal with a dictator is. So.
I don't know. We were wanting to win the hearts and minds of the people in those communities, because it was back when there was the domino theory that the Contras were fighting the Sandinistas and all of that, and if it were to spread throughout, Central America, we, rather than having to go in there and fight, we wanted to have friends there, and so we were making friends, and I really enjoyed doing that. And some of our infantry folks were training with their infantry soldiers, and they had some really funny stories, just the kind of the cultural exchange of being in the woods together and how they did things differently and everything. It was a really good time.
Yeah. You got to look at it more, I think, as a product. Like, what's the product of America? It's the freedom part of it. And what's the other thing going in a lot of the rest of the world? Well, maybe there's some freedom, but there's also a lot of autocracy. So then that's your market. Is this freedom thing is this. You can choose this, you can do that, or you can have somebody tell you what to do. So I think that's how we should approach things more, but I'm not sure what you do with the places that are already so locked up with the authoritarianism that you can't get into it. And if you did, then you would be, it's a fight to the death instead of just an exchange of ideas.
Well, I think it depends on who that authority is, right? In some cases, you've got evil people in authority, and others where you've got people in authority where the people seem to love them. MBS really has the support of the people in Saudi Arabia. Whether you think he's a good guy or not, the people in Saudi Arabia, they love him and they bought into his vision. And I hear nothing but good things. I hear the same thing, and coming out of Jordan. The king of Jordan seems to be a beloved character. So there's places where it works. So I don't go into countries and judge their form of government. I mean, I've had some of them make fun of our form of government and so forth. I mean, it's nobody's perfect, and I try to just get along wherever I go.
Yeah, it's nice to have benevolent leaders, whether you're in an autocracy or a democracy or republic or whatever. Yeah, you want people that are doing the right thing the right way for the right reasons.
Yeah.
Do you think that the U.S. would benefit if every citizen had to do some kind of military service, whether it was a combat role or just a support role?
I think some sort of national service would be helpful. I don't know that everybody's cut out for the military. Maybe there's other ways to serve. I mean, you and I, and my son, one of my sons was cut out for military duty. He loved it. My dad was made general in the military. So there's certain ones of us that would do well in that environment, but my wife or at least two of my daughters, I don't think, maybe all three of my daughters probably wouldn't fit well into the military, but there's other ways they could serve their country. And so I think some sort of national service would help, the patriotism for sure.
Yeah, I think that, and if it wasn't something that was compelled, because I don't know if I like the idea of that, but if it was just offered more, like if the military was a better thing, if it if it had a more clear defined purpose and maybe more trust, I'm just speaking in America now, if you had more trust between the citizens and the military, maybe you could have some other offshoots of it where you didn't do the combat things, but you did things in the homeland or somewhere else where you did go build schools and places in either in the US or in other countries too.
Yeah, I think you and I probably have a lot of trust with the military because we were in the military. Those are our people. We know where they came from. We know how they're trained. I mean, when I see somebody in uniform, whether they're patrolling the streets of New York City, which I've seen them, or they're manning an outpost in the Sinai Desert, because I've seen them there under a UN flag. I walk right up to them and I speak their language, and I'm not afraid of them. Just because they're holding a machine gun, it doesn't scare me because I know how to say the right things and talk with them, and before you know it, I'm in their tent sitting down with them, right? And so I think if more of the folks in the country were able to feel that way about the people in uniform, it would be better for sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure if you want people in camouflage and rifles patrolling as regular police. I'm not, that seems like not a good look for a country where you espouse freedoms. That why would you need that in a place like that? So I think the country has changed a little in the past 50 or 60 years for sure from what it used to be. Or maybe I just wasn't around then and I didn't see it, so I don't know. But sometimes
No,
the
no,
good old days aren't the good old days.
I grew up shortly after Kent State and all that, so I know it could go both ways. But I tend to come from the type of background where having good guys with guns makes me feel safe, not the other way around. And so, I don't. The presence of guns doesn't bother me.
Yeah, I don't mind people with guns. Did the policing for some years, so I understand that.
Yeah,
But it's the, walking around with M16 in camouflage fatigues in the subway of New York is probably my first thing is, why is this necessary?
yeah. It's too
So,
bad it's necessary.
yeah.
I know, but they don't make me feel unsafe. you know.
Yeah, I see your point. I see your point.
Yeah, I mean, good people can argue about these things. I wish it would go back to gosh, when Giuliani was mayor of New York City, they cleaned up that city, and it was a very safe place, and Bloomberg right behind him kept it that way, and it was a well run city. I'd like to see it go back to those days. I have a daughter who lives there in New York City. I go to visit her. I used to spend a lot of time in New York City for my old job, and used to love it. But it's not quite the same place as it used to be.
Maybe we talk about creativity for a few minutes.
Okay.
With not just writing your book, but also in your regular life of business and other pursuits, where do you think that creativity comes from?
Well, I think it's something that each of us are gifted with, and I operate in the entrepreneurial sector, and some of the most creative people are entrepreneurs that create something out of nothing. Right? They have an idea about solving a problem, and they come up with a solution to that problem, and then they got to create a reality around that solution and turn it into a business so they can bring it to people. I absolutely love entrepreneurs because they they change the world. They make it better for all of us by coming up with cool solutions. Every time I open up my phone and, get an Uber or a Lyft, I mean, I think about the creativity, somebody who figured out that you could turn everyday drivers into people who could be taxi cabs. I just think it's wonderful. And there's a million things like that I benefit from every day because some entrepreneur just came up with an idea. Heck, Amazon, I realize I need or want something, and it's at my door sometimes the same day. It's unbelievable. And so that was the creativity of one man who made that happen. And so I think each of us has a spark of creativity in us, and a lot of us are afraid to act upon that creativity. Fortunately, I was willing to do it with my book, right? I mean, that's kind of stepping out and and taking a risk. I think if each of us was willing to take a risk with our creativity, we'd probably make the world a better place by bringing things we have to offer to the rest of the world.
Do you think that the kind of that creative spirit that you tapped into for writing is the same or different than your professional creativity, like your work life?
I think each of us has different gifts, right? I wanted to make music. I didn't have that gift. I as much as I tried I got pretty good at playing the guitar. I learned how to I did voice lessons and studied it as hard as I could. But when it came to actually writing music and performing it, it just wasn't there. It wasn't. And so, writing a book and speaking in public, that I have gifts in. But in making music, and there's other things that I'm not good at, and I probably ought to stay away from those areas where I'm not gifted. So I think each of us has different gifts.
When you do your public speaking, how do you prepare for those?
When I started out, I was terrified of public speaking, just terrified. And I would write out every word that I was going to say. And it was going through a course when I was in graduate school called Toastmasters, where you're forced to get up and speak every week in front of a group, that I finally got over that fear of public speaking, where I didn't have to have that piece of paper with those words on it. What I would do is I would make an outline of what I was going to say, and I would take that outline and I would stick it in my pocket, and I would rehearse my speech in the shower when I was getting ready to go give it. And when I get up to speak, I knew that I had those notes in my pocket if I needed to pull them out. Never once have I pulled them out. And so sometimes I prepare a little bit more than others. I mean, if I'm giving a talk in front of a very large audience, that outline will be in a PowerPoint. And so I will have that PowerPoint up, and when I flip the slides, I have a word or a phrase that will trigger me to remember to talk about this story or that story or this point or that point. And so I find those outlines are very helpful. If it's just a short speech where you can put the thing in your pocket, that's optimal. But if it's 10, 20, 30 minutes and you've got to talk on a lot of things, having those slides to prompt you is helpful.
How can you, when you are giving a talk or a speech somewhere, what are some of the measures you use to be able to determine if you did a good job or not? Like if you lived up to your own expectation?
It's usually the feedback that you get afterwards. If nobody talks to you afterwards, then you probably didn't connect. You probably didn't connect with anyone, right? And there was a speech I gave in Islamabad, Pakistan, which was a really unique experience because I didn't know how it would go over. I had spoken over there previously on cultural similarities and differences. And this time I was challenged to expand that to include religious similarities and differences. And that's kind of a daunting thing to do as an American guy. As far as I could tell, I was the only Caucasian person or only, Christian guy in a room full of thousands of Pakistanis. And I had tested it with one other person before going there. And so when I gave the speech, what was really strange was I would get applause at times where I wasn't expecting it. And I didn't understand it. because I didn't understand the culture and I didn't understand why they were applauding. In fact, I had to stop and think to myself, why are they clapping? And I had a friend of mine over there review it, and she explained to me why they were clapping. It still didn't really connect with me. That was one. And then two, afterwards, a lot of people wanted to talk to me. I had a lot of people wanted to take pictures with me. I had one woman come up to me. I think she was a psychiatrist or psychologist. She said, "You're the bravest man in the world." And we talked for like 45 minutes. It was interesting. And then I got invited to be on a whole bunch of podcasts. So apparently I struck a chord over there where they never had anybody come over and actually address these issues and talk with them. So I opened up a topic that was of strong interest to these people. And they are talking about people of faith. I mean, they open their meetings with reading from the Quran. They break for prayer. I mean, they take it seriously in that society. So it was very interesting to have that reaction that I got. That was the most recent one. So I'm kind of thinking out loud here as she asked me that question. I think I hit the mark because I got a lot of people thinking, and I got a lot of people wanting to talk about the topic.
Why do you think they invited you to talk about that there?
Well, I was invited to talk on whatever I wanted to talk about, and I had people I knew over there who challenged me to expand what I talked about because they knew me. I have friends over there now, and so since they knew me and they knew what I was all about, they said, "You should talk about this," and so I did.
Do you have plans on putting another book together?
No, not right now. I don't. I know how it's done now, and I know that I know that it's not an impossible task like I thought it was before. So I know exactly how I would do it if I were to do it again. But I don't have the current plan to do that. I may at some point, but boy, it was a Herculean effort to get this one done, and so I want to just bask in the glory of having it done and see how it resonates with people. And then a lot of times I do things after I've gotten feedback from people I know and trust. And so you just never know when somebody might come to me and say, "Hey, I was really inspired by your book. I was thinking of doing this. Would you like to collaborate with me?" Something like that may happen. I just haven't committed to doing it yet.
What are some of the things you learned by writing then that you maybe were unexpected?
It takes a lot of time. It really, if you're gonna embark upon doing a book, it's not something you just wake up one day and, "Oh, I'm gonna write this," and you knock it out in a weekend. This is a several year commitment. And so just anybody's thinking about writing a book, think about the fact that you're committing to something that's going to take a lot of your time. And even when it's done, it still takes time because there's edits and there's audiobooks and there's promotion and there's speeches and podcasts. And there's just a lot that goes into putting a book out that you don't really know when you start the journey. I didn't know I'd be sitting here talking to you today, when I sat down to write that book 3 years ago.
Have you, in your professional or speaking life, have you used technology differently? Have you used any AI or anything like that in any of the stuff you're doing now?
Thank goodness ChatGPT wasn't around when I wrote my book, because I know people who are using that to write books, and I can see how it would be useful, but that's not what there might have been one chapter where I was getting some clarification at the end where I had to make an edit that I asked ChatGPT, and I actually got some good points. But I don't think it's the best way to author a book. I do think, though, when you're doing a speech or you're preparing to write something of significance, you can go and kind of crowdsource what the rest of the world thinks about that topic. But if you're not an expert on that topic yourself, you probably have no business writing the piece that you're writing on it or speaking about it, right? If you're just regurgitating something that ChatGPT told you. So I consult it to see what it says, but then I substitute my own intelligence for the content. I might use some of the points that it brought to mind, but I don't run with whatever it spits out.
With your when you were talking about your Mideast travel, you were saying something about the technology, like emerging technologies over there. Does that have to do with your travel over there, or is it just a piece of life?
Well, I've been in the technology industry my entire life. When I was doing accounting and law, we were focusing on those companies that had extraordinary potential, ones that could get venture funded. I would connect them to sources of capital, and then they would grow, and they were good clients, right? Because companies that grow super fast have lots of legal and accounting needs, and so I tried to help make those companies successful. And if we're going to be doing that venture fund in Saudi Arabia, we're going to be looking for those types of companies that could have potentially big markets, and a lot of those are technology companies.
Okay, so it's technology companies, not necessarily using emerging technology in your work to get technology companies.
No, not necessarily.
Have you used any type of AI or computer intelligence, whatever the best name for it is, in your accounting or anything like that?
Well, I've used it for like run of the mill legal documents, and that's one of the challenges the legal industry is facing, is that AI can do kind of run of the mill stuff. If you just need
Yeah.
an NDA or just a basic form, it can produce those things pretty well. I'd be careful if you don't know if you don't know what it is you're looking for, you can get yourself in trouble because it's not perfect. It sometimes will give you stuff that's not perfect, but like
Hmm.
I had to do an agreement. I was doing a particular consulting assignment. I needed a 1-page agreement. It gave me a perfectly good 1-page agreement. Right. So I use it for that type of stuff as opposed to hiring a lawyer for that 1-page agreement. I know what the agreement has to say. And I know that nobody's suing anybody over this document. It's just kind of a handshake with somebody, but you codify it in a DocuSign. So yes, I've used it for that kind of stuff. I have not used it for accounting and things like that. It'd be interesting to see what it could do. I don't know.
Hmm. It'd be interesting to, I haven't used it for storyboards yet for writing, but I wonder how you could definitely apply it to business if you're doing business pitches or whatever, that it seems like you could do storyboards more for if you're bringing in a technology company for something, even if it's just like a not specific, but commercial application of making a picture for a talk or a presentation or putting together some photos for a PowerPoint slide that matches your slide and kind of puts the two businesses together in a way that hasn't happened yet, but could happen.
I'm sure it does stuff that I haven't even scratched the surface of yet. I mean, I don't use it that much where I've figured out how to make it do my job for me. But
Yeah.
I'm sure that it does amazing things I haven't even figured out yet. Certainly, in working with entrepreneurs, I find all sorts of interesting applications for artificial intelligence that people are applying to all sorts of different industries. And it's just not Chat GPT; it's other types of large language models. So I think we've just scratched the surface of all this stuff.
Yeah. What's the best way for people to follow your work or to get information about speaking and your book?
I think, well, if you go to Amazon or Barnes and Noble and you look up how to live the abundant life, and if you need to type in my name, Carl Grant III, it pops up pretty well. So certainly get the book there. To follow me, you can follow me on Instagram. I'm carl.grant.iii. And you can follow me on LinkedIn. If you send me a note on LinkedIn and you reference this podcast or reading the book, I will respond to you. I get a lot of weird messages on LinkedIn that have nothing to do with anything meaningful. But if it's something meaningful, certainly follow me there, and you can message me there. Just look up Carl Grant III on LinkedIn. Those are probably the two best places. I'm on other platforms, but those are probably the two best.
Okay. I have your links for that. And then I also have your, I think, VNMO, your high tech prayer breakfast. I think I have a link for that too.
Well, the high tech prayer breakfast is something I started 22 years ago, and I'm still chairman of it. But I'm not as active with that because I've moved away from that market. So I'm still chairman, but I'm not involved with the day to day over there.
Okay. Any thoughts in closing or topics that you wanted to cover that we didn't cover?
No, I think you covered it all. I think you did a good job. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Yeah. Thank you for your time and your stories. I have some other links for you that I'll put in the show notes along with your Instagram and LinkedIn that I think are worth people checking out. So it's a good idea. Yeah, I guess that's where we'll leave this here. I'll talk to you on the other side of this musical exit.